Well, hello. We're back this week for another edition of Practical Show Tech. We're just going to keep going, guys, until they tell us we can go back to work and somebody calls me and says, I got a show for you. Meanwhile, I'm in my basement in an undisclosed location. We've got an exciting week coming up. A lot of cool topics ranging from IAS to WYSICOM to Telos Intercom or over IP, right? And some of the new worlds that AES 67 is introducing to us. But before that, we are going to talk about today's topic, which is Vectorworks. And we had such an incredible crowd during the plugins discussion led by Andrew Dunning at Landrew Design. And like everything we do on Practical Show Tech, we approach everything backwards. So when we started this whole thing, we were thinking about, okay, how do we get people information immediately about things? Our goal probably wasn't from the beginning to say, hey, how do you start this program from step 1 to step 32? And so we've taken that approach, fortunately or unfortunately, I guess, across a lot of all discussions, which are, hey, we understand a lot of you, our audience is in this, intermediate advanced user on some of these topics. So we wanted to jump right in and get you some information that maybe we weren't as easy to get from the factory or these stories from the field. So today's topic is around that, and here's where crowdsourcing came into play. While we were on the air with Andrew, Philip sends me a note and says, hey, I got a little presentation on taking people from step 1 to step 12. And I was like, this is great, right? And so we're seeing that system at work. And just this morning, Mac and Pete, we were on video chatting with a new friend down in Australia, putting together more topics. So this whole idea of crowdsourcing and stories from the field and applications is starting to come to life. And I think that was our goal, even though we can't get Pete in the shop. That was our original plan. But right now we'll do the next best thing. And today is Philip Barrett's turn to be on the hot seat. Philip's the audio director for creative technology for the US. And I really appreciate you joining us, Philip. This is
my pleasure.
Kind of a new opportunity where we're living in new times. So right now, people are all saying, what can I do to be a part of helping people get educated? It doesn't matter which company I'm with. We've heard this across manufacturers. We've heard this across suppliers and vendors. So I think, Pete, your idea of getting people in the same room, right, virtually, what a great idea you had there, sharing information, because it'll be soon enough we're going to be back in the field. I see we got a lot of our attendees, almost in, but I'm going to turn this as usual to Mac and Pete to say a few things, talk about the Q&A process and what we're going to be doing. So take it away, guys.
Go ahead, Mac.
So Q&A will be in your GoToWebinar control panel. There should be a little pull-down menu that says questions. You can ask your questions in that box. They are not visible to everyone. The questions you ask in that box are visible to the organizers, and we will be curating them and passing them on, since there will be more questions than we will be able to get to. But we will all be curating them and passing them on to Philip, or where we're knowledgeable in that aspect, we may answer them ourselves. But please ask your questions, and we will get to as many of them as we can. There is a chat window. I'm not really sure what that does.
I think that in webinar, that only works among presenters. We were mistaken on that. So
okay,
attendees won't see that.
Okay,
That
so
amongst
themselves. Right. This will be recorded. It will be available for replay on the archive on our website about 24 hours from now. And that's about it on questions, I think, Pete.
One of the questions I know we're going to get, and I'm willing to bet it's within the first 5 questions, is this going to be recorded so I can watch it later? And I know we're going to harp on this, but yes, it's recorded. Phil, go ahead, take it.
Well, hey, thanks, guys. Do you want to pass over the screen here? And
We'll do that right now for you.
yeah. Well, firstly, thanks to Kelly, Peter, and the team for putting these all together. I'm going to ask you guys for feedback whether you're seeing my main screen, which would say Vectorworks Fundamentals on it.
And we are.
Yep, we got it.
And thanks to everybody for joining us. I wish circumstances were different, but I think that this is fantastic that we're taking the time to learn all these different disciplines and to improve our skills and come back when our industry comes back and bring even more value to the table to our clients. The reason behind this course is Vectorworks has really great training programs. However, I felt that there were sticking points and there were things that kind of getting people going. It was almost like they gave you a great car, but it didn't have tires on it. And tires are really easy to get and put on a car, but if you don't know where to get tires from, it's hard to move the car forward. So this course is kind of to address the where do I go from here? How do I get started in Vectorworks? And I look at it as a stepping stone that then will allow people to go on to the Vectorworks training programs and find the modules that suit them. The other thing I felt was that they weren't necessarily aimed at our industry particularly and our typical workflow that we deal with in, in event production, live event production. As video or audio people, particularly lighting guys, sometimes get involved much more at the front end. We tend to get handed a half-baked pie that we then get to be a part of the finishing process. Let me advance my PowerPoint, get to the right screen. So basically, I'm not going to read the slide, but we're going to do an overview of the Vectorworks products, how the screen lays out, templates, and then how do we deal with the typical things that a client supplies us? We'll kind of end up with one of, I think, the most confusing, people find the most confusing part of Vectorworks, which is how do I print my file? How do I make this? How do I actually send this out of the computer? And then we'll kind of touch on some advanced concepts as much to show just what they are and also common issues that you'll find in Vector. When somebody else sends you a Vectorworks file, this thing will pop up, and this is why it's popped up, and this is why you can't move forward. So let's dive in. Vectorworks is a huge program. I like to say that if you understand 15% of this program, you're a power user. There are architects that have no idea that you can do landscaping in Vectorworks. There are landscape designers who have no idea that you can design rock and roll shows in Vectorworks. So we all tend to be type A personalities, and we want to learn every single aspect of a program or a piece of equipment. With Vectorworks, this isn't the case. You just need to know what you need to know to get your job done. The products that we're going to look at today are Spotlight, and we'll touch on RenderWorks. Spotlight is the portion of Vectorworks that was designed specifically for our industry, sound, lighting, video, hoists, rigging, etc. RenderWorks is the package that allows you to view those as a rendered drawing, similar to the kitchen layout that we have on the bottom right here. RenderWorks is not critical at all. It's an additional cost. It's not critical at all to be effective in Vectorworks. Spotlight is. I would say if you're in our industry, Spotlight, you need to buy the Spotlight Vectorworks package. So let's jump into the program itself, and we'll kind of switch to Vectorworks in a minute. I'll go through these quickly, and then I'll show it on the program itself. Your drawing space is sort of broken up into a main area, your central sheet, and it is called a sheet, tool sets, and palettes. And these basically are the various building blocks that you can then use to design, to draw, and to manipulate things in your program. We'll kind of touch on those briefly, as I say, and then I'll jump into the program itself. There are two types. There are fixed and there are floating. The floating palette is one that opens and closes as you hover over it. The resource manager is the typical, oh, okay, I got a little prompt from that I've been, stop sharing my webcam. Okay, I'm hoping that you can still hear me,
I've got
everybody.
this under control. You're all good, Phil.
Perfect. Sorry. Yeah, the type A personality comes out yet again. Resource Manager is a good example of a floating palette. It sits there. If you hover over it, it opens. All the palettes are available from the window menu under palettes, and you can turn them off and on as you need them. And again, I will show you the ones that I feel most commonly should be open on your desktop at all times. And go back to PowerPoint. So they break into the basic palette, which is your general drawing tools, general viewing tools, general measuring tools. You can rotate, you can make a box, you can move the sheet around, you can click on objects, you can go in and out of 3D views, text, etc. Your tool sets are where you'll find things for building objects. In the terms of Spotlight, it's where you'll find your video screens, your audio tools, your lighting focus points, your lighting instruments. The building one, you'll find walls and doors. The one with the light bulb, which I'm not quite sure what they actually call that, is where you'll find some of your cameras and 3D viewing objects in there. And again, we'll go through these. Your attributes is kind of tells you what you're building. Is it a line? Is it a solid? Is it filled? Is it unfilled? Depending on the object you have. You have your snapping tool set, which will define how your mouse and your objects will behave once they get close to each other. And this can be defeated, and again, we'll go into that by holding down the tilde key. I leave them all on, and then I just use the tilde key if I don't need them. And then the sort of the heart of Vectorworks is the palette called Object Info. It's very badly named because it really isn't info. It's a very interactive dialog box that, depending on what you select, gives you a huge variety of parameters, both where the object is in the drawing physically and also what the object is, how it behaves. Here I have one for a simple rectangle, but if you clicked on, for example, a video screen, it would give you the projectors, the projection info, the lens information. And as I said, I feel like it's not named that well because it really is almost the most critical part of working with Vectorworks. You will find yourself using the object info window more than anything else. And then finally, and again, one area that seems to get some confusion is your navigation. And this is purely getting around the drawing, dividing it up into logical chunks, and also producing for print. So let's jump into a Vectorworks file here. And what I've done is I just did new, and I told it to create a blank document. And I already did one. And right now, when you first install it, these the palettes may or may not be there. As I said, I've got these ones open, and you can turn them off and on from the palette window. It's pretty obvious. There's our object info. The idea with Vectorworks is that you can either make your palettes floating on a second screen, or you can do an integrated screen. To make them, I prefer the integrated screen, and they will actually dock. If you bring them to the edge, you'll see that they will go blue, and they will actually dock to a side of the drawing. I actually like, most people like their basic on the top left. I actually like it at the very top. So you can then lay out kind of a palette, you can lay out your desktop the way you like it. Like my object info over here. And we go blue there. I like my navigation down the bottom right. Oh, didn't want to do that, did it? Come on. Come on, Vectorworks. Yeah, well, we'll leave it like that for now. Actually, no, let's fix it. Let's find out why. It should split the two. Does it want to be at the lower? There we go. It wants to be blue down there. Thank you. I don't think that's in the manual, by the way. So once again, we've got our objects, we've got our palettes laid out now in a way that is personally we like, and then you can go to palettes and save palette positions, and that will then, every time you open the program, those palettes will appear in that particular layout. As I say, personal choice is down to it. I happen to like it this way. Other people, you know, come into their own thing. So let's talk about the navigation first. If I go into a drawing, we basically, your navigation is divided up into classes, layers, and viewports, so what we're going to look at today. Your layers, which is the second sort of, I guess they're papers on top of each other. These are sort of large building blocks. Here's a very typical layout of rigging, audio, production. Lighting could then come on and add their own layer. Classes are pieces within layers. So if you want to think about layers as the pantry, classes are the ingredients in the pantry. For example, if you did a layer for seating, you could say, okay, I have a global layer that says seating, but I have some classes that go opening general session, closing general session, gala, banquet night, party night. And those, you could then control those from within that seating layer. I don't want to get too deep into classes. A recommendation that I do is, particularly when you're starting out, go into class none, which doesn't mean there's no class. It's just the name of the class. You can always go back and change class names and change and move layer names later. So I just say, hey, you know, stay in class or none, and you won't get into trouble. So the following that, you then have a couple of drop-down menus, drop-down menu that will show how these how you're working within these, and also the visibilities. And those are you know, fairly obvious. So if we go back to our drawing here, I'm looking at our layers here. You double click to select a layer. And right now I have it set to show snap others. If we see on the right here, active only takes me only to that layer. Very useful if you've got a complicated drawing. Let's say you're trying to put in a sound system and there's so much stuff in there, and I just want to make sure I got all my speakers in. Gray snap others is another popular one I really like. It allows objects to snap to each other, which means that if you get close, it will drop into a logical place, like the center line. If you bring something into the center line, it will click to the center line. Or show snap others is another great one, which basically shows the whole drawing highlighted and it'll snap. The one I advise to stay away is show snap modify others. This means you can grab anything in the drawing on any layer and accidentally delete it, move it, or take it away. And I've found that the lighting guys really hate that when you delete 3 or 4 of their fixtures accidentally when you move the front fills. So I kind of stay away from that one unless you really do want to get down and change everything in the drawing. So I tend to sit in show snap others or gray snap others most of the time as a good way of sort of navigating around. Switching between these is, as I said, easy. It'll highlight those, whatever's on those particular layers. If you're in gray snap others, it becomes even more obvious. Production, your seating, and then here are your classes. Here, and we've got a few bits and pieces they've got in there. As I say, I'm in none. I could add a new class or a new or a new layer, depending on what I wanted to do. And we'll get into that a little later on. Oh, yes, of course. And the last one, which I didn't cover. The third button is your actual layers for printing. And again, we'll get into this at depth at the end of the, kind of towards the end, but this is where you actually build a print template. So if I go to this drawing that we have here, this has hundreds of them. And these are your actual print templates, and there's one right there. And that is your third tab here. For the purpose of this class, we're not going to go through the rest. We just basically are looking at classes, layers, and then our sheet layers or our print layers. Preferences and scale. I don't want to get too deep into this. The preferences, the document settings, you can define your units. Typically, if you're getting drawings from outside the US, they will be in millimeters or meters. Obviously, within the US, we tend to work within feet and inches. The scales that I recommend working in, and again, I don't want to deep dive into them, 196 or 148 are good scales to start drawing in. You'll find that the text is a good size. You're not dealing with objects that are so massive or so tiny. This is, again, for kind of the shows that we do. Obviously, if you're an architect and you're designing a parking lot, they work in a very different scale than us because they're dealing with things that are thousands of feet long. We're typically dealing with hundreds of feet. Again, just a personal preference. So if we go back into Vectorworks, go down document settings, units, and again, there's our, we can define here what our various units are. We've got rounding precisions, things like that. And again, you can then sort of play around with this once you get an idea of how the basics work. It will do dual dimensions. I'm not going to go deep into that, but it will basically show it will show metric and imperial at the same time. One of the great things about Vectorworks is, though, it does understand that there may be times when you want to work into both. And if I draw a line, for example, I can actually tell this line, now we're in the object info, as I said, I can tell this line that, in fact, I want it to be 42 meters. If I just type the M, it will then extrapolate. Or I can tell it to be 64 feet. Even if I just type 64, because I'm in feet and inches, it will become 64 inches. But again, as I say, if I am dealing in a metric world for a couple of minutes, or it's a piece of equipment that is in metric, a good example is an LED tile, which might be 500 millimeters. Gets kind of small down there. But as long as I type the convention for the measurement after the number, you will then be able to, it'll actually put that in the correct number and translate it back to whatever unit you're in. So that's basically your basic layout. I'm working in all of this class. I will be working in a 3D space, and I think that nowadays we really don't have to explain the differences between the two. You've got your 3D is obviously three-dimensional. You're not looking down at a flat object with side views and projection views. You are looking at something that you can manipulate in space. You've added a Z value to your X, Y values, X being left, right, Y being north, south, or up, down, and Z being height. So basically, you know, in 3D, you can actually go in and create the side views, the front views that old 2D programs you would have to generate separately. I was fortunate enough to start in 3D. 3D had just came out when I learned Vectorworks, so I've never worked outside of 3D. I would recommend that you just work in 3D. I say nobody, I know one TD who does, but nobody's ever going to say, oh, why did you give me a 3D drawing? But they will sure sometimes say, why did you give me a 2D drawing? And so your 3D navigation is, let's go back to Vectorworks. If we're in a, this drawing is a good example. It has some 3D and some 2D elements. And we'll go to show snap others. And you can see some of the elements in this drawing are 2D, some of them are 3D. It's a great example of how you would, how you can see the differentiation between the two. This drop-down menu here gives you then your various static 3D views. And top plan will take you back into your conventional working space. One button to remember is this unified view. I've been on at Vectorworks for years to change this. This is deselected by default. Basically, your unified view says, if it's off, it will only the layer that you're on will be rotatable in a 3D dimension. So you can see that suddenly my chairs stay put, my stage stays put, and my screens go to 3D. When that happens, it's because this button is unchecked. I believe it should be checked automatically, and you should you should only uncheck it. Vectorworks don't see it the same way. So when you're looking and things aren't rotating properly, the first place to go is this little unified view. So another aspect of views is your save views. So basically, Vectorworks allows you in a complicated drawing to save various views and save parameters within those views. I won't dig too deep into the parameters. You can save the view, but don't save the various aspects of it, of these objects. This is extremely useful when you're doing a large and complicated drawing. For example, this one here, which has a number of ballrooms in it. Let's go back to a layout somewhere. Let's go back to our level 2 meeting space. It has so many, but we didn't get a whirling rainbow. So you've got all these various ballrooms. What you can do is, we'll zoom in here. You've got your little I command up here, save views, save view, and we'll call this ballroom GS. And then maybe we'll go over here. And we've got this little meeting room right here. So we'll go back to our save view, and we'll call this meeting room. And again, you can see in this menu here, and again, I encourage you to play around with this. You can see how you could say, okay, we're going to save the orientation. We're not going to save the orientation. We're not going to save class visibilities or layer visibilities, et cetera, et cetera. These are things that I don't use much myself. I normally just say, this is the view I want, and I've saved it. But now we can go back and we can just click on the ballroom GS, and it will go back to that view. And an event like this one that probably had 50 or 60 meeting spaces, that becomes very useful very quickly. So the last part of sort of the last part of the beginning, the end of the beginning, the beginning of the end, templates. When you first open a drawing and the new command, you have create a blank document. It literally just creates a blank document. Notice your layout has stayed where it was. It has one design layer and it has one class and a dimensions class, which is where measurements are put. Not very useful because it's, well, that's it. You start from scratch every time. They have you can save templates. And a template is just a drawing that you can then open as a new drawing every time. So for example, I'm going to open, we'll get rid of these. And I am going to open from my folder over here the CT template, which is, as I say, it is just a drawing. There is no difference physically between a template and a drawing. But then I would do save as, and I call it CT template class. Oh, sorry, save as template. I call it class. Within that template, all your preferences are saved. So if you're in feet and inches, for example, that will open as feet and inches. This one will open as millimeters because it came from our Europeans and I haven't changed it back. But then now when you want to do a new file, you can have a new document template. You'll see the drop down and there's the one that we just created. So you can build different templates for different scenarios if you like as well. They're very useful for that. So as we kind of get to the end of the first section here, let's say views, we did templates. I was going to kind of stop here briefly for questions. So I see we've got a few here. Audio educator in the UK, options for diagramming software for flow diagrams. Connect CAD, should we integrate? Should we be looking at Vectorworks software like OmniGraph as best possible industry standard? I do not get that much into the flow diagrams. I'm afraid there is a flow diagram palette I know for Vectorworks. I actually do use OmniGraph, although I find it both very rewarding and highly frustrating. So I don't have an answer on that for this particular class, but if you wanted to reach out by email, I'm more than happy to go further with that. Question about reference layers work. I'm going to go into reference layers. I love that you said this magic eludes me. The problem is that it isn't magic. It's sort of a kludge, and that's why it eludes you. As a freelancer, is there a non-commercial Vectorworks license to learn on it? There is Vectorworks Student Edition, and they are pretty liberal about granting that. If you Google Vectorworks Student Edition, you basically do have to show that you are part of an educational institute, but you don't specifically have to be part of an architectural or design course. You just have to be something that's sort of somewhat relevant. To the pricing on Vectorworks, it sounds that it's a good time to bring that up. It is an expensive program, I believe. It's currently around about $2,000 for Spotlight. However, the annual maintenance fee, which I believe is around $450, and I don't have exact numbers, I apologize, because the licensing is very different depending on who you are and what you do. But once you buy the annual maintenance license, you stay current. That's the last purchase you do, as you were. You pay your $450 a year, and every version that comes out, you are then current. One-to-one scales. Scales, like I said, I don't want to get too deep into it. It's a personal preference. The problem I find with one-to-one is that then you get this incredibly tiny text, and you're having to do 1,000-point text to see things, etc. 196 and 148 tend to just produce drawings, again, in our world that are very easy to manipulate.
And Phil, I'll just throw in there too, a lot of times we're the second, third, fourth department to inherit something. So, you know, a lot of that is kind of out of our control, especially if we have to share back and forth.
Yep. And Peter makes was that Kelly? Was that you? Or was that?
That was me. That was Kelly. Yeah.
Oh, it was Kelly. Kelly makes a very good point, and we're going to get into kind of what we tend to deal with next. You'll get a drawing with a scale. I would do not change that scale because you will, once the scale is kind of baked into a drawing, the impact further down the line with changing scale will make a huge difference, and nobody will be very pleased with you if you try and change the scale on a drawing. So I'm going to move on to our next portion. If I can click back on the PowerPoint.
And one thing, Phil, I'm just going to throw in here real quick.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've said this on our website and wherever we can. This is not Vectorworks, formal factory training. So
good God,
again,
no.
this is all us, in the field. So we definitely suggest reach out to Vectorworks with your questions. Get those kind of from the pricing standpoint. They are extremely accommodating, but I don't want anybody to think we're speaking on their behalf. So
no, I
that
would
my whole
doubly
point there.
emphasize that. I think that Vectorworks will probably have a heart attack if they watch this. This is the okay. How to
just
use
users talking to users.
Users talking to users, just like how many manufacturers have any real concept of how we actually use their equipment in the field. As a Studer rep once said to me, "You cuts the recording tape with the razor blade?" I said, "Yes." So anyway.
All right. So anyhow, thank you for letting me interrupt.
No, thank you for that. So client supplied Vectorworks. This is typically what we're going to deal with. The client has already, the designer, there's been a raft of producers. They've sort of come up with a plan, and now the TD has thankfully produced a Vectorworks that we can actually all start to work on. Your first step, and we'll go into this on a drawing in a second. You're probably going to want to start by creating your own layers, because you're not going to work on the layers that exist there. Sometimes a TD has created layers for you, and they'll say, "Hey, audio, I've created a layer for you, and I've called it, in our case, CT audio, for example." But if we go back to our Caterpillar show, we would then, let's say we wanted to do a layer for, this one's kind of full, isn't it? Well, we'll just call it a layer for our class. You could duplicate a layer and then delete everything out of it, or duplicate a layer and manipulate that layer. It's a right click on the layer, duplicate, it's pretty obvious. It just creates another version of exactly the same layer. And if we go into, if you remember our active only, there's production 2 and there's production. They're exactly the same. Kind of useful if you want to play around and do a different version of something, or if you want to do hey, the closing night banquet, the PA is so incredibly different, I'm going to do it as a completely different layer because we're basically going to have to put up a new PA. But typically you would be creating a new layer, and again, a right click, new, create a new design layer. We'll call it VWX class. That's not good because we're not creating a class, are we? Basically, we will then just click OK, and we've got a VWX webinar. I'm going to change something on this layer to show you a common problem. I created a new layer and the screen went blank. Why did it go blank? I see this a lot. It's because the last scale that you used is the scale that Vectorworks will pick. Again, I'm not quite sure about that, but so basically if you were working in 148 and the client, or 196, and the client gives you a drawing in 1:1, you create a new layer, it'll create a 196 layer and it will disappear. If you create a new layer and you see that, wow, my entire screen went blank, go look at any other layer. You can just click the edit if you want, and it'll tell you on the scale, 196. Go back to the layer you just created and change the scale to 196. And everything should reappear. By the way, the 2 buttons I'm using up here are very good get out of jail buttons. This one is they fit everything to the page area. And this one is fit whatever you've selected to the page area. So if I select, for example, the stage, it'll zoom in on that. And if those really do get you out of jail, because it's very easy to basically have your drawing disappear. Oh, where's my drawing gone? I've lost it. It's there. Click one of those two view buttons. So we've created a new layer. Here, let's select it. And then the next thing we're going to talk about, now we've created our new layer, is the origin. It's up here. The origin is where the 0, 0 is of the drawing. It's a little bit of an advanced concept, but basically at some point in the drawing, there is a 0, 0 point. And if you look down at the bottom right, as I move my cursor, you'll see where my cursor is moving relative to that 0, 0. A lot of times you'll get drawings where the 0, 0 is thousands of feet away. It doesn't really matter in a drawing a lot of times where the origin is until you start doing, particularly laying out things like PA, where you may be using a program like Sound Vision, and you want to make sure that the place that you put the PA in the drawing is the place you put the PA in Sound Vision. I would always communicate with the TD if you are changing the origin of their drawing, or create another drawing and change the origin in that, and then communicate with them that I did change the origin, but I've made a different drawing. You can take my layer and import it. For audio, I'm going to speak as an audio guy. A good place to have your 0, 0 is downstage center. So you would basically go to your tools menu, origin, user origin. We'll do it to next mouse click, and you'll see the snapping function work here. We kind of go to downstage center, and it snaps pretty much to downstage center. I click, and now that's my 0, 0. And if we look at the bottom right, the XY coordinates, now I'm moving a nice relative distance from the 0, 0. As I say, the scale, the origin is something that you definitely want to communicate about, because once you've changed it in a master drawing, it won't move anything, but if people are relating stuff to it already, you have moved the 0, 0 point in the drawing. When you're looking at things, a nice little trick on Vectorworks is the Z key. Let's say this was much more complicated. I wanted to put my 0, 0 for some very strange reason. I wanted to put it out here on one of these genie towers. The Z key will zoom in and keep zooming in until you click. Nice little feature, not sure if it's in the manual. So instead of having to go in and get your magnifying glass or your cursor and zoom and zoom and zoom and move and zoom, just put your cursor where you want. Let's go look at AmpRack World, and it'll keep zooming in until you click. So we've covered we covered creating a layer, we covered the origin, and now we're going to go back, and now we're actually going to do something actually useful in the drawing. We're going to drag some objects in. And this is where your object info, again, becomes a big player. You've got a number of options of either things on the tool palettes or options of things you can drag in from external resources from Vectorworks, many of which are included with the program. So let's have a look at how we do that. We're going to come down here and we're going to pretend there's a lobby here. And by the way, I'm going to get rid of that little line. I'm going to hover over it. It's snap to it because I have my snapping turned on right here. And I'm going to right click, do force select, a very useful command, and I can delete that out. So we got a lobby in here, let's say, and Yeah, okay, we'll do this. And the client has said, we want to put a television in there. Yes, okay. And we'll drag one from there. And we'll click in when we drop it in, it'll give you an orientation. We're just going to, again, we've got snapping on. It'll snap logically to a 90, 180, or 0. And we'll hit return. And now we have a television in there. I'll zoom in a little bit. And now, again, here's where our object info becomes much more than object info, because we can now tell it it's actually, we have a drop-down menu. And this is, in fact, a lot of this stuff is stuff from Landrew himself that's now built into the program. And we can have a 90-inch with on a pedestal. This is a 3D object. We could actually adjust it. We could put it on a stand without a pedestal. That would be sensible, wouldn't it? You can tell I don't do video all my day. So let's do a 90-inch widescreen. And there it is on a stand. Like I said, it's a 3D object. We can move around it. We'll go back to the top. So we've purely dropped an object in from our tool set that comes with Spotlight. And there's obviously other options. There's a video screen, there's a projection screen. Once you get the concept, they all work the same way. Video screen. Once again, it opens up a dialog box when you drop it in. It is exactly the same dialog box that opens up in object info. And again, if it's a projector, it'll tell you front projector, rear projector, the screen size, 16:9, et cetera, et cetera. You've got all these options that, once again, the object info becomes much more of a powerful tool. I can even tell it where to lay it out. If I know the XY coordinates, I could say, well, for some strange reason, they want this downstage center. And if we go click our view object, there it is, downstage center. So we can lay it out with numbers, we can drag it. So let's go back to our screen here, our screen area, our funny lobby that we have. Now, another set of objects are the objects that come in either previous drawings or objects that Vectorworks supplies. So Vectorworks comes with a lot of libraries, and it'll ask you every now and again, hey, do you want to update those libraries? Some of the libraries exist online. Some of the libraries exist on your hard drive. If it's online and you haven't downloaded it yet, you'll see a little cloud arrow. Basically, we've gone in and I've opened up one of the Vectorworks libraries. I opened some furnishings, and our client wants some nice bar stools out here in the lobby too. Well, here's an Eames molded bar stool. I literally just pull it in, drop it into the drawing. It will physically download it. It asks me where I want to put it. I'm just, for the purpose of this, we're just going to click OK. And now there's our Eames bar stool dropped into the drawing, and it is a 3D bar stool. So that actually downloaded it, but now it's permanently into the drawing. The way this saves resources, in the old days, everything was basically on your computer and you had gigabytes of data. And if you were never going to put a potted plant in a drawing, you didn't need 60 potted plants. This allows you to just bring in things you need. You could also take things from your own drawings and you can create favorites. So I've got various favorites that I've created. These are all drawings. If you create a drawing and call the drawing My Favorites, and you put in your favorite Eames chair and your favorite 90-inch monitor and your favorite L-acoustic speakers, you can then open that as a favorite, and it would then always be save as a favorite, and then it would always be here. And it is exactly the same as a drawing. You're literally just going to drag the objects into a drawing, drop them there, and then say that that's your favorite. I've got some from companies that I work with regularly, for example. I've got their favorites because they have drawing, particular drawing symbols that they use as part of their house style. And they have various things here. For a house on the floor, for example. That's a pre-done symbol that's apparently taking a while to come in. And there we go. Obviously, you can draw objects from scratch. These are your typical object commands here. You can draw a rectangle. Again, your object info becomes a powerful tool. You can say, actually, I've made it 6 feet by 6 feet, but actually it's going to be 8 feet. If I can type, it's going to be 8 feet by 6 feet. I can define what corner that's from. So I could say from the center, from the bottom left, top right, whatever. And I can also, right now, I've just created a 2D object. As you can see, it's flat on the floor. But if I go model extrude or command E, I can then extrude it and say, okay, it's a 2-foot block. The client has a display cabinet. We know it's a floor display cabinet. It's 2 foot by 8 foot by 6 foot. And now we've created that as a solid object. And the addition now, if you notice, we now have a bottom Z. So we have now, because it's a 3D object, we can define its height, and by the magic of levitation, it is floating 2 feet in the air. We have other options. They're all, you're all smart people. They're pretty obvious. You can draw a circle. You can tell the circle what its diameter is or its radius. You can extrude the circle. This is a nice little one, a polygon tool, where you can make a more complex polygon shape. And again, you can extrude that if you want. Select it again. And we can make that 2-foot polygon. So we've created our shapes here. And again, once they become 3D, they get they then get a Z value, a height value associated with them. Let's go back to our PowerPoint for a second. So we've covered dropping objects in from the tool set. We've covered dropping objects in from the resource manager, and we've covered drawing objects as well. So we got our drawings in. How do we move them within the drawing? There's a number of ways of replicating objects, of moving objects. Obviously, the most simple way is you grab your object and you literally physically drag it. A useful thing for particularly, again, for audio designers like myself is the reflect tool. I can basically take an object and I can reflect another version of it. So the rotate tool. I can take an object, I select the point of rotation, and this is our snapping again. It's actually given me the center of that square, thinks I probably want to rotate around that. I define the line of rotation, and then I define the angle. Now, here's a good place to show another feature of Vectorworks. If you know what the angle is going to be, you can actually, if you see the blue box where the number is changing, the minus 16, minus 18, if you hit tab, you can actually type in minus 33, hit enter twice, and it will automatically do that rotation for you. One of the things of Vectorworks is there's lots of ways of doing the same task. I try and show the ones that are, I think, the most obvious or most simple. Obviously, you can also go into the rotate command and you can go rotate 33 degrees and it'll go back to where it was. So there's your rotate tool, your reflect tool. Those are both ones that you'll find yourself using using a lot in your day-to-day designs. So let's say we'll go back to our lobby that doesn't exist, and so we'll go into some other useful tools in Vectorworks. Let's get rid of these for now. So we've got our screen here. Maybe it's really a trade show booth. I don't know. Maybe it's a lobby. It's a trade show area in the lobby. How about that? The client wants 6 of them. So we can actually select duplicate array on your edit menu, and we can tell that we need 5 more of these, and they need to be 7 feet apart on a line on the X. And now we have a whole bank of monitors rather close to each other. Okay, it's great. Very easy way to align, to set up multiple objects. Or we can have the client says, this is great, but actually I have a 50 foot. Now I'm going to use the tab command again, and I'm going to go in and I'm just going to tell that line to be 50 feet. If I tab again, it'll give me the option of an angle. I'm going to leave it at 0 degrees because we're not rotating it. So the client says, well, actually, I have a 50-foot wide booth and I need to put 4 monitors on it. So back under duplicate, I have to select both objects. I have a command now, duplicate along path. The line has gone red because it's smart enough to assume that's the path you want. And I'm going to duplicate along that path, and I need 3 more. And a total of 3 duplicates. So now the client has got his 3 monitors across his 50-foot line, his 50-foot scenic piece, and they're nice and equally spaced. And you can just delete the line that you used at that point. So we've covered the basic layout tools. We covered the moving to rotating, duplicating, the M tool. Now, I knew there was one I was missing. This is a very useful tool. We'll draw a square. Well, in fact, actually, we'll go back to our fictional monitors. And I just closed down one of my tool sets. There we go. Go down to our fictional monitor. We'll select our monitor. And actually, we want to move that. We want to move all 3 of these. They actually are a little bit close to the background, and we want to move them a foot further into the room. Command N is your move tool. 1 foot. And we've done a simple move. If we wanted to duplicate them, if you select an object, hold down the Option key, you'll see a little plus sign that appears. And if I just drag the identical object, or not in this case. Control Z is the undo command on most programs, and it's very useful. And now I have a duplicate that I've just basically dragged from the original. Cut, copy, and paste function as well, just like a typical program. You hit copy. If you click and then hit paste, it will paste where you clicked. But if you copy and do paste in place, it will paste right on top of the other one. So in fact, there are 2 there. That's useful if you're trying to create a second layer where perhaps you're doing a version of something. Oh, you know what? I'm going to try this differently. I'm going to do another layer, but I want to copy these things, and these things aren't going to change between the 2. Obviously, one way is to duplicate the layer, or another way is you could select the items that you want and just do paste in place, and then they will paste to that new layer. I sort of skipped over that nudge. The nudge tool or the move tool is extremely useful. So we've done this. We did duplicate along the path. So it's sort of a good time, I think, to kind of do a break and see if there's any more questions. At this point, we've sort of taken a client's Vectorworks file they've given us. We've learned how to create layers on that and then work within that, put our own objects in depending on what department we have. I see some things about by duplicating a layer, are all the items and objects in that layer duplicated? Wouldn't that cause confusion? Yes, you need, you know, again, like we do with shows, labeling is labeling is basically key to this, just like cables. Label your cables, label your layers, make them something obvious. And you could call it alternate version or closing night ceremony, you know, come up with it where it becomes obvious. I think we saw, I kind of glossed over them. I think it's pretty obvious, but go back to Vectorworks. You can also turn layers off individually. So I can, the layer that's selected will always be visible, but if I deselect that layer, my X mark here has basically turned the visibility off. If I click here, they will always be gray, irrespective of the show snap, gray snap commands at the top. So this is useful for if you want to hide something temporarily or leave something permanently grayed. I tend to leave the lighting hidden. It's not personal if anybody's in lighting, but you guys put a whole lot of instruments in and slow down a drawing. I don't see all the tool sets that I see in yours. How do I get all those original sets? The tool sets come complete with Spotlight. So I think you may have maybe Vectorworks Designer, which is the basic program without the spotlights. I love the creating a 0-0 origin idea. Is there a way to drop any of this into SoundVision? Yes. I can do a course if there's sufficient interest. I can do a course of taking a CAD and actually putting a CAD into SoundVision. It's a little bit painful, but it is doable, and I pretty much use it every time I use SoundVision. I do actually bring a CAD over into SoundVision. But I think at this point then are we good to move on, Kelly?
I think so. A few of these comments we'll just touch on at the very end.
Yeah.
But I think you've talked about the saved screens, and we've kind of gotten through all that. So yeah, I would say we'll keep moving forward. And Ken, I see your note about the spotlight thing, and we'll address that. So
yeah. So the client supplies you a DWG. DWG is AutoCAD. It is the original CAD program. It's still very popular in the architectural world, particularly because it supports, Vectorworks has gotten better at supporting massive operations, but AutoCAD wrote the book on 150 architects working on the same hospital at the same time and being able to work on the same CADs. It was popular in our industry before Vectorworks. You will still come across it a lot. A lot of people still use it. Unfortunately, DWG or AutoCAD will not import or read a Vectorworks file. However, Vectorworks will read a DWG file. So basically what we're going to do here is I'll show you how to bring in a client's DWG, and then also some common things that you'll find or issues that happen when you bring in a DWG. And then also, how do we verify that DWG? So back to Vectorworks. I happen to have, we'll get rid of these for now. So we'll go in and we'll do our new, and we're going to do our template because we created a template, and that's how we're doing our drawings now. Create a new drawing, file, import, single DXF DWG, and I happen to have a DWG right here. Being that it's, by the way, AutoCAD, I believe, is only PC. I don't think there's a Mac version even today. Can't be sure about that. So it doesn't even recognize it as a program. Click open on the file. It will look at the file and it will give you a drop-down menu, and then it'll give you some options on the import. I would say typically you do not need to touch any of these. Vectorworks now does a very good job of importing DWG files. A thing to note is to stay away from this reference. Reference will not actually import the file, it will create a link to the file. And if that file moves or the name is changed, you will no longer have access to it within this drawing. I would say bring it in. So we're going to click OK. And depending on the size of the file, this can be pretty quick or it can be pretty slow. This one isn't so bad. And it says, hey, gives a little triumphance. Okay. And we've brought in somebody else's DWG. Now, you'll find that this was in these layers were already in our drawing. AutoCAD does not use classes and layers, it only uses classes. So the classes will come over, whatever classes were in the drawing, but it'll come over as one layer, which will have the name of the drawing. So there's quite a lot of cleanup work to do if you've got a complex drawing and you want to start making things into your own Vectorworks layers and classes. There's often a lot of cleanup to do. The first thing I recommend doing when you bring one in, just in case, is verify that the dimensions and the scale have come across correctly. Well, this one is easy because they've actually got a dimension there that they've left for us, which is very kind. So we'll take our tape measure tool and we'll quickly, and it's basically 344, 5 3/4 inches. So yep, we're close enough for a show. Now let's zoom in on one of their ballrooms. Now, if we click on this, we will see that this is actually, back to our object info, it's telling us this is a 2D symbol. And oftentimes out of AutoCAD, things will export as a symbol, which is a collection of things put together. The best way to describe a symbol, I'm reaching here. It's basically what we dragged in as a chair. It's what we dragged in as a screen, except it's our whole ballroom. And this is in the PowerPoint that we're distributing. We are going to really want to be able to work with that. We're going to want to be able to convert that back into the objects. Command K converts a symbol into a group. And we're going to tell it to convert all sub-objects. So it's going to convert everything. And then Command U will ungroup that. Now we can actually select the individual objects themselves. Those are they're actually in the modify menu as well. I believe it's convert. If you select something, yeah, convert to group. If we select this one, it will, I think we got everything. So, but I use the commands. And again, this is in the PDF that Kelly and the guys are kindly putting up after this. So now we basically have our client DWG in our drawing. We can then create a new layer. We can do new, and we can call it audio because that's what I do. Oh, it won't let me duplicate a layer, so we'll call it audio 2 just so we can do an example. And click OK, and it's disappeared. And now we know why it's disappeared, because If we look at this layer, the scale is 1 to 2000. And if we look at this layer, it's the last scale we used, which was 196. Now we can see it. So call us out again. And that's really at that point, you've now got a client DWG in and you can manipulate it. If you want to give it back to the client, you would then use the export command and export as DWG DXF. It again gives you a default. I would recommend using the default. There are some, if you're exporting to Sound Vision, there are some tricks you have to do in this, but the default itself is generally, again, they've done a very good job at Vectorworks of interrelating the two file formats. And that will generally give the client something that they can then open and manipulate. Unfortunately, there is no way of checking at our end because unless you have AutoCAD, you can't check. You just hope that it is interrelating correctly. So we've got through the AutoCAD part, the DWG AutoCAD. We brought it in using, we created a new file, and then we imported it. We let Vectorworks define its own settings. We converted the symbols to a group, we ungrouped them, and then we were working on the drawing, as I said, note, scale, and units. And I probably should have put this one in first, but basically was when you import it, always check your dimensions. I put this one in because a good place to check dimensions is often what we'll get is a DWG from the property because they generated it through their architect and their architect works in DWG. There may be no dimensions on there at all. A good then place to go is basically to the website, the meetings website for the property, in this case, the Venetian Ballroom, find out how big that ballroom is, and then get your tape measure out and start measuring against that and make sure that the results correlate. Generally, if you're within a few inches, you've got it right. You'll generally know because, hey, it'll be 150 feet different or something. And okay, we've got a scale problem here that's wrong. So what next? Well, the only thing the client could send us is a PDF. They don't actually have anything else. Now, not to worry. It's amazing what you can do with a PDF in Vectorworks. So let's go back to our Vectorworks program. And we will do, once again, new. We'll open our template. We will do an import. You can also drag and drop, by the way. Now, we'll do import PDF. You could drag it in. Go back to the folder. I've got this, and I have a PDF here for the Westin Costa Mesa. That's a rather nice property, I have to say. If there's more than one page, it'll give me the option of what pages you want to do. Again, this reference path, I would leave it deselected. If you have it selected, it will not import the document. It will merely reference the document. And I saw a couple of questions come out about this. This way, it will import the document directly. And there we have a PDF of our ballroom. And these people, thankfully, did actually put some dimensions on. So let's have a look and see if how close we are. There are such a thing as scaled PDFs, but which we'll be generating. Remember the Z command and the tilde. If I hold down the tilde key, which is the top left key on your keyboard, you'll release the snapping. It's trying to make assumptions here. And we'll do the Z key again and hold down the tilde key. And we see that that was 64 feet. So obviously it's a long way out. How do we change that? There is absolutely the magic button in Vectorworks to do this. So basically we know now, the old days we used to have to get out the math, the calculator and go, okay, so 64 feet, this is 129 feet, that's a ratio of, and then basically do the math. But if we make sure the whole drawing is selected, we'll do modify, scale objects. This is where we used to have to do it. Symmetric by distance. So you've got a little measuring tool here, and we're going to measure what it is right now, and we'll get close enough. And we click the other end. It says, okay, well, that's 64 foot 8.5, 64 foot 4 1/8. What do you want it to be? Well, we want it to be 129 feet. And it will rescale the entire drawing to be 129 feet. And if we get our tape measure out, it's 129 feet. It's a very, very useful tool. And I know that, you know, a lot of people here, like myself, we get a lot of times, all we get is a PDF, and that's all we're going to get. And we need to actually generate a decent drawing from it. So at that point, you're free to start dropping in your elements. You know, you can go back into your production. You can take your video screen. You can drop your projector in. Trace over. We'll put it 3 feet in the air, just above the foot off the stage. And now suddenly we have a 3D element in our 2D drawing. Remember our little command key here? Remember that has to be selected. So, well, let's say we want to get a little bit more advanced with that. You know, right now it's a pretty flat drawing, and we actually want to show the client kind of how this is going to look. So I have a layer here already called Venue 3D, and packaged with every Vectorworks, I believe, is the building tool. I select a wall. This little preferences thing here appears on many commands. You can see I can do inside wall, outside wall. I can tell the wall that it's a 6-inch thickness, and I literally just trace the ballroom. I can also go in and use my tab key, if you remember that tab key again, and actually define the dimensions. Hit enter, and now I've got a wall. It's 8 foot tall. Maybe my ballroom's a little bit taller than that. It's a 12-foot tall wall. So now I've got that defined. Again, in the building tools, I don't want to get too deep into them, but there's some very other useful things. Doors. We like doors. Doors help us figure out where not to put screens and where to put screens. Again, we go back to our door preferences here, and we can tell it it's a 6 foot, and it's a 6 foot swing by part. This is the typical hotel door, and there's a fire exit back here. It'll actually lock to the wall and drop eventually at some point. And there's 2 entrance doors here. And come on. Thank you. Thinking about something. There we go. And if we go into 3D view, there are doors. We can even tell them how much in the door settings, we can tell them if we want them to be to show them open. 3D front, 3D visualization. No, oh yeah, draw 3D open. There we go. We can actually say, okay, I want our doors to be shown open. So using these tools, you can actually give the client something that's a little more professional, a little more finished show of their room. It's a nice little added value, perhaps. The hotel's handed them something from Meeting Matrix, which looks even worse than this. And you've actually come back and said, hey, here's actually a pretty nice drawing. And you know what? We can look at some sight lines too and make sure that your screens aren't being blocked by the PA, or that the people at the back have a good view to the screens, etc. So basically, we've sort of covered there, okay, what do we do with a client-supplied PDF? We import it. We can define how many pages it is, or if we only want one page, we could say page 5, because the client sent us their PowerPoint deck printed as a PDF, and we don't need the other slides. We just need that one particular page. We would then go in and figure out our dimensioning. And as I said before, property resources are useful for this. We would then use the magic button, as I call it, to actually scale the drawing correctly and create layers. We could then start actually making a 3D space out of it, tracing the walls, adding the doors. By the way, if you've got nothing in a drawing to measure, in the US, the typical hotel or arena bifold door is 6 foot wide. A typical swing, one-way swing door is 3 foot wide. If you've got nothing else in a drawing to measure, you can try measuring a door and see how close that gets you. A good little trick. And we end up with a 3D drawing that we can kind of give the client. So we get to the end of the kind of dealing with drawings part. So let me start looking at questions. CAD to sound vision. Okay, we'll see about doing that. Dropping video. Lots of people have. If you put, hang on a second. Sorry, I've scrolled way down. I have Spotlight to show me exporting it, using as a reference for map. Can you address the opposite direction? Exporting a venue drafting from VWX into DWG, using it as a reference. Yes, so we covered that it will export as well. Can you also show me how to best export a DWG? I'm sometimes told that my people don't see my exports in 3D. Let's go back quickly into the drawing. The checkbox for that, typically the checkbox, let's go back to our Caterpillar show. Export. And again, it's hard because you can't check it. These two are critical to understanding the 3D. Export solids as ACES solids and triangulate to preserve fills. These tend to throw things like sound vision, but I've found that generally fixes that problem if people say they can't see your 3D. And of course, we don't even know generally what version of DWG they're even using. As we know, there's some very old licenses out there. And I would say as well, some of them would be that maybe they don't even support 3D. A good point. You could check the AutoCAD with the free AutoCAD viewer for Mac. That's actually a very good point. And you know what? I have actually done that, and I'd completely forgot about it. I have to say, I get frustrated with DWG. I feel like, our industry has a standard, and I'll be honest, this is a Vectorworks class. I can say this, like, get with the program. 90% of the world we deal with is in Vectorworks. You should be in Vectorworks. I'm jumping into Connect CAD. This is not something I'm familiar with Connect CAD, I'm afraid. Are you drawing out the PDF in 3D? Yes. Is there a new class created when you draw a wall versus a door? No, I was working in none. That's a good question. And in fact, what you can do as well, you can come in and reclass afterwards too. You can sort of say, I can select my walls and I can say class, and I can say new class, and I'm going to call it venue walls. And now I have a class of venue walls, which could be actually useful because those are sometimes, if you're trying to look at sight lines and things, the walls get in the way. Somewhere in here, there should be a class that says venue walls, because I just created it. Menu walls right there. I turn it off and it disappears, or I can make it gray. Speaking for CT, do you personally or both place a higher value, or do you have a preference for technicians that brings CAD skills to the table? I would say that's a very good question. I would say absolutely. You know, being able, this is part of this course. If you're an audio guy or an LED guy, we don't expect you to be able to be a hardcore Vectorworks guy. You need to be able to open the client's drawing, put your assets in, not damage the client's drawing, be neat and tidy with your layout, and then leave. That's sort of really the skill set that I look for a technician to bring to the table. It's a very good question. And that's part of this course is this is what you need to know to get by, to work safely in a master drawing, and to put your assets in that a more experienced draftsperson can then proceed with the project. Can a zero reference be different in a layer than for the rest of the drawing? You can create relative layer origins. I'm not going to get into that for the scope of this for this class. There are some ways of doing it though. Okay, Mr. Barrett. So moving on, viewports. And this is the part that I find that people find the most confusing. It really isn't that difficult once you get your head around the concept. And the first concept is that if you hit print on your Vectorworks sheet, it will try and print it completely 100% to the scale you put. So if it's 196 and you print a 100-foot line, it'll spit out 50 pieces of paper to print that line. You need to then create a printable version of what you have. And those are called viewports, and they're in your sheet layers. If you remember, we had our third box that we haven't got into yet. Those are our sheets. I've got my friendly buttons that will take you in and out of there. And then what we're going to do is we'll look to various applications of how do we do that. And the first one we're going to do is, well, typical for us, I've already got a client's file, in which case it's this one. We'll take this big one here. If I go to their sheet layers, they've got a tremendous number of them. And this is very typical for a large drawing. They've probably got over 100. Numbering becomes critical. So the first thing to do with a client one, typically, let's say you've added a PA system or you've added your LED wall. We'll pick a viewport that we like. When you click on it, it'll open it. Actually, let's do one that is only because I think it's going to be easier to see if we do a landscape. Somewhere in here, there's a landscape. Did they do this entire drawing? Let's do the general session. That'll be nice and complicated. Okay, well, they don't. Again, your magic buttons, if it's too small, we can fit to the whole page area. What we want to do is we've put in the LED. We want to do an LED layout. The easiest way is to duplicate this one viewport. Again, right-click, duplicate, and it appears down the bottom. We can then edit it and call it general session LED layout. I can also type LED layout. And now we have a version. We haven't touched anything the client's done, and we can then mess around on this one. Well, let's say, for example, the LED wall actually is backstage. It's right here. We don't need to show the whole room to show a 30-foot wide LED wall. So what we can do is, again, our object info, we click on this is the viewport. Our object info lights up, tells us it's a viewport, gives us a lot of information about it, including its scale. It also has the layers and classes that are visible. And we'll come back to that in a minute, but you can turn layers and classes off, or you can gray them. Well, actually, let's do that. We're doing LED. So do they have one for seating? I'm thinking that maybe there's one for seating in layers. It may be in the classes. We'll come back to that. We actually only really want to show the staging area. We don't need it to be this tiny. So we will go back and we're actually going to change the scale. And we'll do 1/8 of an inch. And go back and look at our sheet. And obviously at this point, it's got huge. And we can move it into place. We may have gotten a little big with 1/8 of an inch. Let's go down one. Let's do a 1/16 of an inch. And if we look again, I can zoom out with this one and the whole drawing's there. We will drag this over to be in the right place. Move a little more to the center of the drawing. And we're going to double click on it because obviously we've got all this area outside the drawing that we don't want. It's quite obvious. There's a crop. And we've got blue handle boxes here that will allow us to crop the drawing. Grab the top one. Exit the crop. And now we have a viewport showing just our stage area and our LED screens. I've obviously gone through it pretty quickly. It's pretty crude, but so there's other things we can do with the double click. We can find out what class those seats are on because they're kind of distracting. We can select, if we double click, let me go back again. I went through that a little quickly. Double click, it again opens the dialog box. We can actually select a design layer. And we can say, okay, Hall AC. It's a very big drawing, this one, so it's taking a while even on my computer. And now we're actually in the design layer and we can work within the design layer. Any changes we make, we are actually making to the design layer. This is extremely useful if you want to touch up something. Okay, I put my downstage monitors 2 foot off center by mistake. I want to quickly move them back. I can just drop in. I don't recommend doing heavy editing in this mode, but again, we can right click, we can go force select and Keynote, it's a reference layer. Well, this wasn't such a great example, but we could find out layers, we could find out where things were, and we could gray them out if we wanted to make this visibly more appealing. So that's basically taking existing client's file and viewports and creating your own version of it so that you're not touching theirs. But what happens if we've got a drawing like our famous caterpillar drawing? I'll zoom out. And we look at our viewports here and, well, there's nothing there. We haven't got any viewports. How do we create a viewport from scratch? We'll go back into our drawing. Whatever's visible is what the viewport will see. Now remember, we can change that later as well with the double click. We're just going to draw a rectangle around what we want to see on the viewport. It doesn't matter what layer it's on, where it is. typically I'll make it no line, obviously no solid, because we don't want it to hide anything. View, create viewport. If you've got multiple sheets on the sheet layer, it'll ask you, you can select which one you want it on. Basically, it'll allow you to turn off and on the layers of classes here. At this point, we don't care about that. We can do that later. I click OK. And it has now created that within our drawing. I can rotate it using the rotate command or the rotate button in the basic tool. I can move it. And as we said, your object info, again, is key here. I can change the scale. 1/8 is a little small. I could actually blow it up a little bit. It's pretty nice. It's kind of needs some cropping there, but actually, even if I crop it, I think I can get it to be pretty nice. Now, let's say I want to represent the stage as the same part of this. Let's go back. On a sheet layer, you can have multiple viewports. So we're going to put this one back here. Let's turn it up the right way. And since we're going to kind of hand this one out on show site, we're going to come back and we're going to create a second viewport on this. Cut to production. And we just want to show a close-up of the stage detail here. We're going to make our box. No line, no fill, view, create viewport. We're going to create it on the, we only have one print sheet, but we're going to create it on the same one. And there it is. So we can actually put a detail on there. This one's definitely very small, so we probably want to go up to a 1/4 inch scale there. And now we sort of have a zoom in the whole thing. Again, we can edit this one. We can go into the design layers. So we could actually say, well, actually, we're going to do a production. These wings actually want to come downstage 2 feet. Now, why is there a ghosting there? Well, remember was something we did earlier. So we actually had to, if you remember, we created a duplicate layer. So on my layers, I'm actually going to turn off production 2. I can preview it, and now our duplicate layer is gone. But notice it's still on this drawing. There's our ghosted wings. So you can use layers, and I think at this point you can kind of see how effective classes can be when you want to show multiple things on a drawing. You can turn things off and on in the viewports by using that selection tool, and you can create multiple views of things which showing different objects or different versions of your event. Again, we went through cropping, and then again, if you double click, you've got annotations. So annotations are things that are attached to the viewport, but they're not part of the drawing, and they are dynamic. So in this case, it's going to highlight my drawing table here, which I can then call, I could call this one stage view. And that's an annotation at this point. It could be a little bigger, so let's make the text on that 24 and 24, so we can actually read it. But also in annotations is where we would put our measurements. We can move this around so he's a little closer because that's a different scale to this one. We want that to be aware. So if we go into our measuring tool, we can let's make those red. And again, object info, the most misnamed piece of Vectorworks. It gives us a large number of choices. Right now it's ASME, American Society of something, side by side. Normally I just work in architectural. You can tell it, hey, no fractions, because it doesn't matter if it's an inch off. Because this is an annotation, it will change if we change the scale. And that's the beauty of annotations, is they change with the drawing. So we change the scale, the annotation changes. And if you notice, the scale is interactive. So when we change the scale, it also gave us a different scale for the printout. So at this point, you've sort of got a viewport ready to go. Titling. So you've got your title block here. There's two, you'll come across quite a few drawings that are still using an old title block system, which is kind of part of the drawing. If you hover over it, you'll see that it becomes orange. You double click it. It's going to open the edit viewport, because it is a viewport, and there is actually a design layer called title block. This is how drawings were done up until Vectorworks 17 or 18. You created a title block as a drawing. It was in your drawing somewhere. To edit it, you basically went in and again, it's a big drawing. Wouldn't we like to be doing a show? And you literally just clicked in it, and you could call it AWS test drawing. You edited directly into the drawing itself. And we'll finally come back to the viewport. Let's go back to our Caterpillar show. Built into Vectorworks now is actually an interactive drawing sheet. And if you double click it, it'll open up, edit title block border, project data. That's at that point, then you can start naming. It's pretty obvious. Project data, project name. I never said I could type. And you can see that then is now interactive as part of the drawing. And you can actually define how these lay out, again, beyond the scope of this class, but you can build these to be custom to your needs. So let's quickly review what we've done here before we hit the print button. Let's scroll back up. Yeah, sorry, where's Mrs. There she is. So we've basically figured our buttons. We figured out how to duplicate a client's existing viewport, so that we're just basically working on something they've already done. Keeps their title block. We can then rename it. We can adjust the scale, as we saw. Again, in the object info window, we can turn off and on layers and classes, or gray them to emphasize what we want to show or what we don't want to show. We've created a new viewport on a sheet layer, and we've shown how to edit those, where you can edit actually inside the drawing. You can also crop them, and we've done the annotations as well. Again, your object info box will give you your annotations. And your dynamic measurement from that. We've gone through titling, the old school titling of basically typing into a box, and then new school titling of the interactive title box itself. So now, printing. You finally got a viewport and you want to print it. This basically, you've done all the heavy lifting at this point. So if we go back to Caterpillar, come on, Vectorworks, thank you. You don't print direct. You would want to export as a PDF. Export command, export PDF. Basically, these are generally set. The resolution, I always say don't go crazy here. If somebody's viewing on a screen, it's 72 dpi anyway. A good print resolution for typical drawings is about 150 dpi. It's really easy to create massive PDFs, particularly if your drawing has a lot of elements in it. You'll create these PDFs that you can't email and people can't open and they just hate you for them, particularly if it's clients that they just want to put it in a PowerPoint to show their client, or they just want to look at it on their desktop. You hit export and we'll save it to the desktop. And there you go. We have something that you can then print. Obviously, just open your print menu, and the rest of it then is driven from the print menu. Let's say there's also a feature though. Let's say you've got your AWS show that we have here. We have our multiple viewports, and we want to actually send the client an overview. In this case, let's say of all the levels. There's also a feature called Publish. Publish allows you to make a booklet. I'll clear these out so that we don't have a. So all the viewports will appear right here, and what we can say is type. Let's do that. They've sorted them by name, so that's fine. We can say, okay, we want to send them this one, the rehearsal room, and the fire marshal plan. Move them over. You can save this as well, and it'll prompt us. Do you want to save the current set of items, publish as a save set? I leave that to remind me. I don't always tell it to do the selected action. I'll hit yes. A useful thing is to go client. What's today? It's the 13th. 4/13/20, 12:47 p.m. That way, when the client says, "Oh, I don't think I saw that," or "Which was that one you sent me?" The wish to continue, yes, please go. And it will now publish. Again, big drawing is taking time. The advantage of making the published document and giving it a date and a time is, as I say, when the client comes back and says, "Oh, when did you send me this one?" You can look at it and go, "Okay, I actually published those. I made a mistake. I published those as separate files, and rather than one booklet." So let's do it again. Publish, and file export. There we go. Yes. Okay. I have it checked to do it as separate files. Yes, we'll do a save set. And we'll do it to the desktop. Give it a few minutes to do it. And I have that set to auto open, I believe. Maybe not. Yeah, there it is. So now we've got a book that has all three in there. So printing is as simple as that. You export the PDF. Don't go crazy on your DPI unless there's a convincing reason for it. Again, there are some other options, as you can see. You can export the layers as separate PDF layers. Typically, that's not something we would ever want to do. Again, that's more of an architectural feature. You can also create a published file, which is a group of drawings put together in one booklet. Fantastic for making show books where you can show every room for 20 breakouts. You could produce one show book that has all 20 breakouts in. And there you go. Any questions at this point? Oh, that's right. I have to read the questions. Kelly, how are we doing for time?
We got about, it's 12:50 now, and we've got time. We don't have a hard out, so it's kind of on you as
Great.
you're comfortable.
Great. If you duplicate a layer or place for your LED, how do they remove all other items entered by others so they aren't confusing with both the duplicate layer and the original or not cause ghosting? I think I showed that by being able to turn off and on layers, if visibility, if you don't want to see them, or classes, or obviously deleting. I'm not following the method for creating a viewport. I wonder if you could read it slowly, step by step. You just said, let's look at the viewports, but clicked on the sheet layers. I think that predates when I showed how to create a viewport. If not, please feel free Ken, feel free to reach out to me directly and I'm happy to go for you. And somebody said, best Vectorworks instructions I've ever seen. I'm blushing, Stan. Do you make use of the cable function of Vectorworks in CT? I do not. I know that lighting guys do, and lighting guys can get pretty deep into those functions. Is there a step-by-step on how to import a manufacturer's array frame or speaker box into the object info tool? I can build fine from scratch, but see no way to import when it's drop an array into the drawing. Not sure if this makes sense. It does actually. The speaker tool in particular that comes packaged as part of Spotlight. Let's go back to Vectorworks. Let's go back to our much abused Caterpillar drawing. The speaker tool, speaker array, and speaker that are in Vectorworks that come as part of Spotlight are not are wireframe only, wireframe and basic rendering. If you buy Landrew's plugins, which I have and they're fantastic, I'm not doing them as part of this course, they do actually have the option to bring in the manufacturer's drawings and use those. I will caution you, and it's part of my CAD, part of my audio side of this, more audio focused version of this. If you're drawing, 60, 70 Cara in a room, and all 60, 70 Cara have the handles and the screws and the back plates, you will create a drawing that is extremely large. And philosophically, you have to ask yourself, what does the client want to see? The client wants to see, and the same with LED. The client wants to see how big is the PA, how heavy is it, where's it going in the room, how far is it off the floor. The client does not care that you have the handles in the correct places. So, there's a sort of philosophical question around that. But yes, using Landrew's tools that you buy from Landrew, and they're incredibly cheap. I mean, it's the greatest deal in drafting. He actually allows you to do that. Can you show a viewport with a 3D view? Absolutely, exactly the same way as I did it here. Let's quickly take the time. I'll do a 3D view. And I will do, in fact, I can probably do this one, just a, and there it is as a 3D. Let's get rid of the other two. As I said, whatever you draw the box around and whatever visible is what it will draw the viewport as. So if it is in 3D and you're showing XYZ layers and XYZ classes, that's what the 3D viewport will be. Okay. So now we kind of move on to the advanced side. And really what I'm doing here is not showing you how to do these things. I really want to show the kind of things that you'll typically see and what to do about them, or the kind of features that it has that I encourage you to dig deeper into that will help you in the kind of things that we do. Renderworks. Renderworks is basically the system that creates solid objects from your wireframes. I've drawn a PA system here. If I go back to our caterpillar drawing, I can render the television screens we made real quickly. Now, as I say, Renderworks is a plugin that is an extra charge from Vectorworks. It doesn't come with it. Right now, I'm hovering over this little teapot. I have no idea why it's a teapot. It says I'm in wireframe. I can go to OpenGL, and now I actually have rendered objects. Obviously, you can go into tremendous detail on these. And in fact, the opening slide and closing slide I have on my presentation is a fully rendered in Vectorworks drawing. It was not done by me. And, you know, at a certain point, again, there's the philosophical question of, are you producing an engineering drawing for use by technicians to set up your show effectively? Or are you producing a pretty picture to show a client? Fully rendered drawings that are capable of fully rendering can get very, very big, very, very quickly. Which actually reminds me of a common thing. If you've got a drawing, that Amazon drawing is a good example, where moving things around gets difficult. Look for the classes or layers that are hurting you. If you're dropping in an LED screen, you don't need to see the chairs. If the room has 4,000 3D chairs in there, every time you move the screen, it's redrawing those chairs. Turn off that layer. That's again where active only becomes really useful. I'm just going to look at what I'm doing. It'll speed up your drawing process tremendously. And again, or somebody has, you know, brought in 150 speaker cabinets, all in great detail, showing exactly where the K-con connectors are. It's having to draw those every single time you move the drawing around. So, camera tool. This is a really nice feature. It's not difficult to use in Vectorworks, and it's a great way, particularly of checking sight lines. If you're the TD, if you're a video guy, dropping your screen in and you want to make sure audio's not messing with you, or if you're an audio guy, want to make sure you're not messing with video, because we know where we sit. And we'll go back to our, we'll unrender, we'll go back to wireframe. And again, I'm not going to get big into the settings of this, but you, basically, it's found under your little light bulb. These are, by the way, completely customizable. The tool sets, again, not for this class, but you can build your own custom tool sets over here as well. You take your Renderworks camera, let's say we are worried about what's the kind of the worst seat in the house, pretty much. It's this guy over here. What's he actually going to see? We'll drop the camera. Well, he's looking at this guy on stage. Again, if we click OK, our object info becomes our place to go. The camera's at 5 foot, which is a bit high. We'll put it at 4 foot. And the guy on stage is a 6 foot guy. He's on a 2 foot stage, so he'll be at 8 feet. And we can activate that camera view. And we can kind of get a look. This drawing's not a great example. We don't have 3D seating, but we can kind of get a look of what his view actually looks like. This is renderable, obviously. Again, if I go into OpenGL just for speed, we've been hacking on this drawing. The screens are sitting on the ground. They are actually movable in the render feature. So if I actually did, if I select that screen, if I can actually then tell it, okay, you're not really on the floor, you're at 4 feet. Whatever, symbol definition, there we go. So that's the camera view. As I say, great for checking sight lines and things like that. It's not actually that complicated, and it is pretty intuitive. When you go back to top plan and select the camera, which I've lost. It's over there somewhere. Yep, there we go. That's a thing where it's a good idea to have a class for the camera, because that's something you would want to turn off if you were doing viewports. You don't want that camera line sitting there. It allows you to change the perspective, the angle of the coverage, et cetera, et cetera. Good fun tool to play with as well. We covered the camera tool, how it can render shows. Event design menu. This is something that Vectorworks put in, again, I think about 2017. And basically it allows you to design an entire show almost from one menu. I think it's a blunt object myself, but we'll touch on it briefly. So if we go into a new, once again, let's get rid of these guys for now. Now we want save view. New, our template. You basically draw a box to be your room. Notice my tab key again. I'm going to tab this, and I'm going to say my room is 128 feet. Go to my object info, and it's 128 feet by 160 feet, sort of your typical hotel ballroom. We'll zoom out to the to the extremities. Come on. Using the event design, then you, with that selected, create room, and it'll say, okay, how high is your ceiling? It's 12 foot. It's adding in rendering elements already. It's saying the room is almond paint, like every hotel ballroom we've been in, and it's a blue carpet. It allows you to define your classes if you want to. Click OK, you get that. We can then go in and we can draw a stage. Let's make it from the center out. I'll show a little trick here. We want our stage to be 16 feet by 12 feet. It's offset because we're going to have a screen over there. And again, it's selected, create stage. Our stage is 2 foot high, it's standard decks, et cetera, et cetera. It'll then build a stage. And again, if we go into our 3D view, we've already created 3D objects. Stairs, lectern, screen, and then views. It's pretty self-explanatory. It is fun to play around with. As I say, I think it's a bit of a blunt object, but it's there, and you should definitely know about it. And you'll see drawings come in that have been done with this tool, and you kind of is like, okay, I see they did that with the event design menu. Reference viewports and files. So I'm talking about these because this is something that will tend to catch you out. You can bring in, and for a large drawing, let's say a very large drawing, you may have different elements coming from lots of different designers. You can bring those in as layers, import those layers to a master drawing, but you can also have them as a reference file. What that is instead of bringing it into the drawing looks at that external file. There's a lot of advantages to this. It keeps the drawing smaller, particularly when it's a very complicated drawing. If the lighting crew change around light fixtures, they're not doing it on the master drawing. They just change it on their drawing. The master drawing relates to that drawing, and therefore you can see it. If you want to edit the viewport, you can double click it just like we did on our viewports on our print layers, and you actually open that file. Unfortunately, what happens though is this. The issue that we come up against is that typically in the production workflow of ours, there are so many hands working on the drawings and so many drop boxes that the reference will get broken, and either the drawing will get moved, it'll get renamed. And I show this to you because this is something you'll actually probably see quite a lot. It's basically there is something in the drawing that was referenced. It's not actually in the drawing, and basically Vectorworks is saying, do you want me to go look for it, or do you want me just to ignore it? If you've got an idea of where it might be, you could say, hey, go look for it. Or a lot of times you can just click through and say no, because the reference actually isn't that important to you. It's the lighting instruments and you're the LED guy or you're the audio guy. I put this up so that when you see this, you kind of get an idea of, okay, this is what it's trying to do. And you can see it below. It's telling you it's looking to its references and updating them and making sure it can still see them. Having had a situation at 1 o'clock in the morning with my phone ringing and a client in Korea, South Korea, looking for a redesign of their ballroom, and I could not find the reference viewport anywhere, I got quite anti them quite quickly. But I do see their use as well. And then the last thing I want to cover is project sharing and collaboration tools. Again, I'm not going to get deep into this, but Vectorworks has a way where you check in and check out a drawing, and it's created as a separate drawing, and it's actually a Vectorworks project or VWP file. Basically, you open the drawing, you manipulate it, you then get the option, a menu option to check it back into the library, and it updates on the library. Vectorworks themselves have some extremely good courses on this. Again, caution reigns, because if things get lost, references get lost, then you basically end up where people are no longer working on the same version of the drawing, or they can't open the drawing at all. Again, I show you this so that if you meet it in the field, you'll understand, okay, this is what this is. It is a Vectorworks project, and there are a number of us sharing it. Once you check it back into Vectorworks, it then extrapolates your changes, adds them to other people's changes, and hopefully has a finished document. It is more time consuming because you are literally checking in and out the document every time you want to make a change. You have to check it out, check it back in again. It can be a very powerful tool. I think its application is probably more relevant for a large place, a company like Opus that has a really great in-house design department. Makes total sense. Everything is stored on their servers. They know where all the files are. All the drafts people work together in an office. Again, with what we do, things tend to get lost or missing. You're backstage with a bad internet connection, and you're trying to check out a file to change the angle of the projectors, or to move the PA slightly. I say with caution. Again, just so you know what you see. And that sort of brings us to the final Q&A segment. I've gone slightly over my, I try and keep this under 2 hours. Kelly, are we okay to keep going?
Oh, we are okay to keep going. Yeah, I would say go ahead and start going through those Q&A questions there.
Okay, so having often used the array tool and seeing that you saving items as favorite resource manager, do you find that they migrate better from year to year? I have had bad luck in migrating my speakers in array tool from year to year. And hi, Philip. Hello there. Yes, the speakers actually exist. It's called Audio Toolset, and it exists within it cannot be an external folder. I have actually talked to Landrew about this many times, about why can't it be a Dropbox where you keep it updated. It's called Audio Toolset Data. And if let's go back to my desktop here, I think I can escape out of this. Yep. If I just do a basic search in my Mac, show all in Finder so we can do the path. So basically, Audio Toolset Data exists in, I have my own version saved, but the folder is called Audio Toolset Data. It exists in your Vectorworks library's default audio tools. And I generally save an external version every now and again for that reason. If it gets lost, you have an uncorrupted version. I have to say that the last 2 Vectorworks migrations I've done have been great. I was, it used to be a hold your nose, schedule a day, and come back and see what's broken for a week afterwards. And the last 2 times that I've done it, I've been very impressed that it's actually moved everything over. Yeah, so that's that.
And I think to your point, there is copying that XML
Yeah,
over with your
exactly.
latest
Yeah.
inventory, right?
Yeah. Thank you for "we know our place" comment. Yes, the last time that when was the last time they moved the LED screen to accommodate audio? Never. Great. I think that's about it on the questions. I've got on the screen here now where the Vectorworks courses are actually to be found with Vectorworks. It's a great opportunity. They are really, really well done. You can kind of pick the modules that interest you or you think are relevant for what your particular application is in our industry. So again, I'd like to thank Kelly, you and the guys for putting together all this stuff. It's fantastic what you guys have done. I mean, this is, I hate to say we need to get a virus again, but it would be nice to do this every 2 or 3 years, wouldn't it?
Definitely. It's been a really great show. I really appreciated it a lot. And a lot of the comments from people, like a couple we put up there, like, this is the best presentation I've ever seen. I have to echo. There's a lot of normal usage tips which you as a regular user brought out, which somehow aren't that important when you're talking about power tools.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as I say, Vectorworks, there's 100 ways of doing a lot of these operations. What I try and show is the way that I'm conscious that a lot of us in our industry, we're not using it every single day. Therefore, I try to think of commands that you'll remember when you go back into the program every 4 or 5 days or every 2 weeks or so when you have to go into the program. There are some very slick tools, but they're not things that you'll necessarily stay ingrained in your head if you're not in the program every single day of your life.
There was one more question that came up about if you want to have detailed drawings of your speakers. What was the name of the person who made a tool set?
That's Andrew Dunning.
Who we had on earlier.
Yeah, who you had on earlier. So Andrew created the tools for Vectorworks. So they're actually all the audio tools, the lift tool and a number of the other tools in the tool palette were actually created by Andrew and licensed to Vectorworks. His versions are better and allow you to do some more power, more flexibility, and that's kind of what he sells. And as I say, I highly recommend them. I didn't show them as part of this course because I feel like he covered them brilliantly, and it's kind of a separate course, and it's not included with the product. It's a plug-in add-on.
Yeah, and as you mentioned earlier, it's a very reasonably priced plug-in add-in. It's $66
It's a complete no-brainer. Yeah.
Right. For a program you may have spent multiple thousands of dollars on, a $66 plug-in is pretty reasonable.
Yeah. For the price of a Las Vegas hotel cheeseburger and a pint of beer, you too can have the powerful tools. Yeah. Would you like to charge that to your room, sir?
And we put the handouts in there too. So Philip's PDF is available in the handouts window. If you didn't mention that while I was restoring my network connection.
And that will be available along with all the questions in a zip file with our video on our website, which actually was a recording of the show. It's hard to believe we did that, but
believe it or not, it's there.
I did see one more question came up, last question from Kenneth Goodwin. Kenneth asks, do you have any tips on how to have accurate speaker hardware like a yoke that's attached to a loudspeaker but can pan and tilt? Oftentimes my systems need to be accurate down to the shackle. The LED guys get into this a lot. They do have to produce engineering drawings that are, because of the extreme weights they deal with, that are that accurate. What they do is they basically take the manufacturer's CADs, make their own versions. They kind of strip them down a little bit, but then they put them into Vectorworks as symbols in their favorites. And then they literally do have shackles, Verlocks, you name it. They actually have those available to them because they do have to produce that level of detail and drawing as well.
Oh, that's why I was asking about Andrew Dunning, because I would assume his drawings have the pan tilt capability on the product.
Yeah, but they don't have things like the shackles, the hooks, the eyelets and things. And I know that, as I say, in audio, we tend not to have to deal with that level of detail, but the LED guys do. And I know that our LED folks have a lot of those resources because of that.
Yeah, I think, you know, two big things I wanted to bring up. One is when you're working with folks that don't necessarily have Vectorworks, not even AutoCAD, the Vectorworks viewer is an important link to have that you can send with a drawing. If somebody says, hey, I don't have Vectorworks, send them a link with the viewer. They have it for both Windows and PC. I know some people were mentioning during the webinar about not having similar tool sets. I would suggest going to the help menu and then do a pull down to download content just to make sure that you have the latest and greatest that Vectorworks is providing. And then short of that, obviously I would reach out to Vectorworks to they're one of their chats with a customer service to try and identify that. But those are my two big go-tos there. And I think, guys, we have a new topic for a lunch thing. One point will be sound vision and importing from Vectorworks into sound vision, right?
Yeah, which is an interesting hop, skip, and a jump. I worked with L-Acoustics on some of that implementation. So
nice. Well,
we could definitely put one together for that.
Well,
yeah,
you know,
working planes are already pretty confusing in sound vision.
Yeah, exactly.
Getting the right side of the drawing.
We won't claim to actually do a sound vision. We'll do it the same messed up way we do everything else. We're going to show you how to import a Vectorworks into sound vision, and somebody else will teach you how to use sound vision.
Exactly. Although I have to say, in sound vision's defense, their room creation tools in the last 2 or 3 years have made it so powerful now. They've made it there's less of a need to use Vectorworks as an interim step, except speed, because man, you can crank a room out really quickly in Vectorworks to get it into sound vision.
Sure.
And their coverage models are really spot on.
Yeah.
They are just slightly really accurate. So that kind of wraps us up for this session. Thank you again, Philip, for all this great preparation you did. I know there were a number of people that really appreciated the in-depth quality. You see his contact info here. Don't be afraid to reach out to him via email, and I'm sure that if it's something that he can't answer, he will be the first to connect you up with Vectorworks in that sense and help find those answers. And like everything in our industry, let's keep doing our crowdsourcing. We're not pretending to have step-by-step perfectly. We're just trying to do our part to help everybody be ready to do their job, you know, just a little more effectively once we get our opportunity to be out in the field again. So
great.
Thanks again. And Pete, oh good. I see Pete is keeping his hands clean, and we're going to be good. And Philip, please say thank you to everyone in the organization for sharing your time with us today.
Thank you. We've been benefiting greatly as an organization from these, so it's our little bit of giving back. So thank you.
As it is ours as well.
Yeah, great guys. Well, I appreciate it. And again, feel free. Don't feel bad if you want to email me. That's perfectly fine.
Well, there you go. You heard that, folks.
Terrific.
Don't feel bad. All right. So long. Have a great afternoon.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye-bye.